So hello, good morning and welcome everybody. Great that you tuned in for this inspiring morning session, fully dedicated to food service. And between all the other sessions, this one is already standing out because it's one of the few, if not the only, which has its focus on the specifics of food service. Well, in this session, ladies and gentlemen, I have the privilege of welcoming four experts who will be joining as a panelist. Harry Brouwer, Lloyd Mann, Sophie Attwood and Olaf van der Veen will discuss where and how food service players can have a real impact on the food system's transformation through collaboration across the value chain. And they will introduce themselves in a moment before we'll be kicking off with the first presentation. Well, my name is Hans Steenbergen, and I will be the moderator of this special online pre-UN Summit meeting. And I'm editor-in-chief and trend watcher and co-founder of the company of Food Inspiration, which is specialized in analyzing and imagineering the food and service trends of tomorrow. Well, as you probably know, this event serves a key milestone leading up to the UN Food System Summit 2021 and is co-organized by World Resource Institute, Wageningen University and Research, and Unilever. We'll start a summit with 3 short presentations of our panel members. After that, we'll start with the conversation. And in the meantime, we're open for questions and remarks. So please join us, and we're happy to pass your questions through to the panel. And I know they will do their best to answer them. Well, in the end, or at the end, we'll try to come up with at least 2 bold actions for the food service industry. And why is that? Why are bold actions necessary? Well, as you might know, there are a lot of fundamental flaws in our current food system. Looking at the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, it's clear that food and food systems play a fundamental role in making our societies more healthy, sustainable, green, with less hunger, less obesity, better animal welfare, more biodiversity, better income for the farmers, less waste, and so on and so on. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to change and become a part of the solution instead of the problem. So bold steps and goals, perhaps easy to formulate, but difficult to execute, are necessary to leave our planet to our children with the same possibilities as we had when we started with our lives. All right, having said that, it's time to introduce our panel. First, we will introduce them, they will introduce themselves, and then afterwards we will start with the first presentation. Our first speaker of this morning is Sophie Attwood of the Better Buying Lab. Welcome, Sophie.
Good morning, Hans.
Please introduce yourself.
So I'm Sophie Attwood and I work at the World Resources Institute in a programme called the Better Buying Lab, and we work on the topic of getting consumers to choose more sustainable diets, which I'll be presenting on in a moment.
Well, great, thank you, Sophie. Our second panelist is executive chef of Sodexo, Lloyd Mann. Welcome, Lloyd.
Hi, Hans. Hello, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here today. My name is Lloyd Mann, and I'm the global executive chef for Sodexo. And today I oversee the company's culinary approach and menu strategy. So, looking forward to sharing with you a little bit more about what we've been up to. And some of the recipes, best practices we have, and most importantly, our passion for food. So, Hans, back to you.
Well, thank you. Our third panelist is co-founder of Orbisk, Olaf van Veen. Olaf, welcome.
Hi, good morning, everyone. It's a true pleasure to be here as well amongst these spectacular lineup of speakers. At Orbisk, we developed a fully automated food waste monitor for restaurants, and I'll be elaborating on that in a bit.
So 3 great topics already. And our fourth member is Harry Brouwer, the CEO of Unilever Food Solutions. Welcome, Harry.
Thank you very much, Hans, and good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to have us all here together around this table. I am leading Unilever Food Solutions, and to make just a bridge to what you just said, Hans, not food problems, but food solutions, which is the B2B business of Unilever, delivering the food service industry in about 70 plus countries and to many chefs globally. Over, back to you, Hans.
Well, thank you, Harry. So we're open for questions and remarks and your insights. It's great that you're joining us, and I'm very happy to take you through this morning with all the experts who are sharing their knowledge and insights, and let's try to make it pleasurable too. So let's kick off with the insights from behavioral science. May I give the floor to Sophie Attwood, please? Sophie, is yours.
Thanks, Hans. So I think if we can go on to the next slide. So as mentioned at the Better Buying Lab, we're focusing on sustainable diets. And here we go. So what exactly am I talking about when I talk about sustainable diets? So what we know at the moment is that agriculture has a huge impact on the environment, but that different foods have different impacts. So meat, and in particular beef and lamb, so ruminant meat, has an outsized environmental impact compared to plant-based alternatives. And as an example, per gram of protein, beef actually produces around 20 times more greenhouse gas emissions than common plant-based sources of protein like beans. So the implication of this is that if we want to feed a growing population, and the population is growing, we're projected to be 10 billion people on the planet by 2050, whilst also curbing greenhouse gas emissions and not expanding our agriculture into virgin forest land, we're going to need a rapid and massive downward shift in the amount of meat that people are eating. So it doesn't necessarily mean going vegan, but what we're recommending is around halving consumption levels from current intake levels, and that's to around 50 calories a day, which is the equivalent around about a burger and a half a week. So next slide, please. So at the Better Buying Lab, we're working on ways to try to make this shift happen by influencing the foods that consumers choose to buy. And we do this by using insights from behavioural science and from marketing to try to shift consumers towards the plant-based option when they're choosing food. And we work by creating the innovations and then working with a range of partners in the food service industry and in academia to test out these solutions in real world restaurants to see if they actually work on real consumers. Next slide, please. So we've researched a few different areas, and in 2019 this was the main focus of our work. So we published this document at the beginning of this year. It's called the Playbook, and it outlines the entire landscape of solutions that are available to change consumer choices from the field of behavioural science. And we actually got these together by doing a large review of the academic literature, around 4,000 papers we searched through, and we did a large food service industry consultation process. So asked lots of people working in the industry about the approaches that they tried in their own operations to encourage their consumers to change their choices. On that graph here on the left it plots out all our solutions as 57 in total, and it's ranking them according to how much the food service sample that we spoke to rated them as potentially being of high impact, so they worked well to change consumer choice, and also highly feasible to implement, so they're easy to do. The point I'd like to draw your attention to is the top right hand quadrant of that graph. Now these are all the techniques of the 57 that were ranked above average in terms of impact and feasibility. So that forms our shortlist of priority approaches that we would recommend restaurants consider implementing. If you'd like to move on the slide. And the 23 are listed here, so it's a bit much to read, but the playbook itself is available on our website. So if you just Google WRI playbook, you'll be able to get hold of this, and it's open access and free to download. So this was a really good exercise to get all this insight into one place, but what we're trying to do now is turn our attention to accelerating adoption of these techniques in food service so we can actually get that behaviour change that we need to happen at scale. So next slide. To drive that transformation, our team have created 2 additional initiatives under this, which is the Cool Food brand. The first of which is a pledge, the Cool Food Pledge, and it's a challenge to food service providers to promise to meet a science-based greenhouse gas reduction emissions reduction target. So that's around 25% less emissions from the food served by 2030 compared to where it was at 2015, and 50% less by 2050. And that's in line with the goals of the Paris Agreement on climate. Next slide, please. And the pledge itself involves 3 steps. So firstly, the pledge, signing up. And when food service organisations sign up with us, they then need to send us their food procurement data for the year, which goes to our team who crunches the numbers and computes the greenhouse gas emissions and then feeds this back to members. So an example of what the feedback looks like is here. So as you can see on the left, that's percentage of purchases represented by different food categories. So here we have ruminant meat at around 3%. And then on the right hand side, the pie chart here shows you how that contributes to the total greenhouse gas emissions of the organisation. So you can see that 3% of ruminant meat has gone to nearly 50% of greenhouse gases, which is just goes to show the scale. So we then repeat every year and we track progress over time so we can help organisations understand if they're shifting in the right direction. We also help organisations with that shift by working with them to build a behaviour change strategy to help influence their consumers to cut the emissions of the food. And we do this based on the findings of the playbook and whether we deliver in an interactive workshop format. And lastly, we also help members to promote their success. So every year we publish the group's collective success at reaching the target. We hold an annual event and we manage associated media and communications. So who's already signed up? Here you go. We have organisations representing cities, hospitals, hotels, restaurants and universities. And if we push the animation button, here we go. Here's our newest members who joined very recently in the last month or so: University of Cambridge, New York University, City of Copenhagen, City of Toronto, Nestle, Harvester and Browns. So we're getting lots of interest, lots of people signing up. So next slide. So a quick insight into progress to date. Here's what the collective group achieved in 2019. So it's an absolute reduction in emissions from the food served of 3%, which is slightly above where we'd need to be to meet 2030 targets. So we're kind of on track, slightly ahead of track. And that 3% might not sound like very much, but it's actually the equivalent of taking 700,000 European cars off the road for a year. So it all scales up. And just moving on. So the other initiative that we've recently launched is this Cool Food Meals, and the goal of this is really to engage the consumer directly. The Cool Food Meals is effectively this badge, you can see it here just on the front of that slide, that makes it very easy for consumers to identify dishes that are better for the planet. So we badge dishes that fall below a certain greenhouse gas emission footprint level and that also meet minimum nutrition requirements, which is based on the Nutri-Score methodology. So the purpose of the badge is really to make it very easy for consumers to recognise, without having to process too much information, which meals on a menu are the easy, climate-friendly option. And last slide from me. Here we go. So we launched the Cool Food Meals a couple of weeks ago. It's a new initiative with Panera, which is a fast casual restaurant chain in the US of around 2,000 restaurants. And Panera sells, well, some of the dishes listed on the slide, things like salads, soups, sandwiches. So if you go now onto the Panera website, you can see that Cool Food logo on dishes that meet our sustainability standards. So it's very early days of this initiative, but we're looking now at accelerating adoption of this Cool Food Meals badge with other organisations. So if anyone's interested in knowing more, you can go on the website coolfood.org, or very welcome to email me, and I think we'll probably be sharing details, contact details at the end. So, and that's all. I'll hand back to Hans.
Well, thank you, Sophie. It's quite impressive, I must say. And immediately, that's a spontaneous question from me to you. Looking at your presentation, can you explain to me why people are so addicted to meat?
Yeah, it's a complex question. I think it's been such an integral part of people's diets for a long period of time, and food is very habitual. So it's a behaviour that we don't tend to necessarily think about a lot. We have a lot of very strong habits around what we eat. There's a lot of attachments and associations to meat. You know, it's got very profound, I think, cultural significance. And it's seen as very satisfying, you know, quite quite a masculine food, quite strong. So as opposed to things like salad, which have slightly more negative connotations. So lots of reasons.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you very much for your insights and presentation. It was great. And we'll be talking it afterwards. After Lloyd Mann, our chef of Sodexo, will share his insights with us. Lloyd, take the floor, please.
Hi, Hans. Thank you. We can probably move on straight on to the next slide, if that's okay. So, as I previously mentioned, my name's Lloyd Mann, and I'm the Global Executive Chef from Sodexo. I'll take the next slide and tell you a bit more information. So Sodexo is a global food services company, and we're present in 67 countries and have chefs on, you know, around 30,000 sites, and these chefs are serving tens of millions of meals every day. Our chefs feed students, office workers, you know, hospital patients, the military, as well as kind of athletes in events such as the Tour de France and right up to Michelin star level at the Eiffel Tower. So just to name drop a few, but we certainly have a strong global reach in many different environments. I'll take the next slide, please. And just before we get started, I'd probably like to take a bit of a step back and look at the current context. And as Sophie pointed out, there are a lot of problems with the food system today. And some of these can be perceived at a planetary level. And part of the issue is really how we grow food, you know, how food is grown and some of the outputs from that. So looking at greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture, you know, and we take this right back into our kitchens. So how we're preparing food and what we're eating, it really has an effect on what you want to see and what you see today. So while thousands of plants are edible on this planet, we only eat a handful of these, and studies estimate that nearly half of our plant-based calories just come from 3 crops: maize, rice and wheat. Now these habits are hurting biodiversity and pushing the planet beyond the limits that we can sustain supply of. And our approach really to food is also taking a toll on human health, and these increased rates of obesity and diet-related diseases such as diabetes. So we have to change. We know we have to change. We need to make these kind of 3 key shifts in the food that we're grown and we eat globally. We need to eat more vegetables. We need more variety in the carbohydrates, and we need more of a plant-based diet, and certainly looking at plant-based protein also. Simply adding these new things to our plate, you know, more often doesn't necessarily always work. And as we heard from Sophie, there's some challenges around that. We know at Sodexo we can be part of fixing the food system. You know, it sounds very easy, but because, you know, we're creatures of habit, change is really quite hard, and we find it quite a challenge. I think everybody does. It's a challenge that food services companies like Sodexo must take on. We have the scale, we're able to make a difference, and we've got, you know, consumers across a wide demographic to work towards. I'll take the next slide, please. So why, I guess, you know, because it can be quite difficult to know what to cook with. You know, some of the ingredients we're talking around sustainability are not particularly known very well. If I look back on some of the recipes that we launched using Future 50 ingredients back in 2019, you know, realistically, who's ever tried to cook cactus or prepare cactus or parsley at home? We don't. There's an element of awareness that needs to kick in, and we know there's more of a, you're more likely to try something new if it's prepared for us in a restaurant or in a university or workplace restaurant, and that spark of intrigue is normally taken back, and this is a way we know we can influence some of the cooking habits down the road, and ultimately influence our guests to cook more sustainable at home. I'll take the next slide, please. And at Sodexo, we're looking to move the needle on a variety of topics, to make food a force for good. And the biggest lever that we have is the environmental impact through the meals we serve. We're working to drive change for our menu mix. Our kind of current target on plant-based diets is around 33% of the menu. So that's an amount of times you'd see a kind of plant-based dish on the menu. With some of our countries really pushing ahead, with the US as a great example of nearly hitting 30% already. And for this to be successful, we need to offer, meals for our clients that they want to buy, their guests want to eat. And this means encouraging creativity and innovation in the kitchens, but also at the same time, working with vendor partners to introduce responsible ingredients. We also need to, make sure that this is appealing to our guests and they want to choose this responsible meal option. I'll take the next slide, please. And this is, one of the reasons why we're working to empower our chefs to fight against climate change. Chefs can be a real vessel to do good. We kind of do this internally through our Global Chef Academy program, which is a training resource. And this is our way to look at how we can introduce more plant-based dishes into the menu mix, educate our team, and look at how we can tackle food waste and food reduction. The program itself is really aimed at around 2,500 chefs at senior level, and we work in tandem with some partners as well on this, from the Humane Society right the way through, looking at developing up vegan and vegetarian recipes for future development. As I said before, our chefs are also working to reduce food waste through culinary creativity and new cooking methods. In the UK, to give you an example, one of the key programs, we're looking at a kind of program called Wasteful to Tasteful, and it's a fantastic initiative that looks to utilise crops that would normally be discarded or ploughed back into the fields. And it gives our chefs a real opportunity to try new ingredients that would normally be seen as surplus and incorporate them into key recipes and just make them think about food. I'll take the next slide, please. And then really just to summarise, these are some of the ways at Sodexo that we can drive change in our kitchens. The food service sector will certainly be a big player with food systems transformation, and the scale means that we can make big impact. But we'll ultimately achieve progress by working with our partners and being able to kind of develop multi-stakeholder solutions across the value chain. I'm certainly looking forward to hearing from Olaf as we continue to explore these challenges further and some of the promising paths that we can look to progress down. Hans, I'll hand back over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Lloyd. Also really interesting. Thank you very much for your presentation. I've got immediate one question for you also, if I may.
Sure.
Because I love chefs, I travel all around the world and I interviewed, let's say, hundreds and thousands of them everywhere in every continent in the world. And what do you think? Is there a special responsibility for chefs in terms of climate-friendly eating?
Yeah, I think as I mentioned, Hans, I think chefs have always been instrumental in kind of passing knowledge on and adapting to change. They have a kind of canny way of implementing not only new trends, but what the guests want to eat onto the menus. And, I think with people more aware of, the individual impact chefs can have, chefs are there teaching and taking the mantle in teaching new skills. Look at through lockdown in particular, we had chefs on Instagram, making sourdough, sharing their knowledge. Everybody seemed to be making banana bread, which if you think about it is linked to, food waste and with their overripe bananas. But also kind of there's some good examples of high profile chefs that are really out there to not only inspire the current group of chefs that we've got in kind of in the industry. People like Rennie Redzepi in Copenhagen, 3 Michelin stars, but his whole focus is around locally sourced, sustainable ingredients, and taking that, to the forests of Copenhagen or to the kind of shoreline. And on the other side of the Atlantic, you've got people that are really, truly taking a deep look into how they inspire people. Dan Barber, passionate chef. His whole movement is around tackling food waste and sustainability. Dan Barber is really educating chefs around what is edible. I mean, for me, the fundamental piece is he's taken an ingredient and what you can do with it. The whole food production system is going back into his kitchen. So he's looking at the byproducts and how they can be incorporated into the menu. And we're trying to take that on within Sodexo. It's a very challenging thing, but something that's been there for a long while. If you go back to chefs such as Michel Brouwer, ultimately looking at plants and the humble vegetable as a key ingredient to his menu. So this is not something that's new. I think it's about how we can kind of inspire the next group of chefs to really focus on this. And I think also some of the skills that could be perceived as being lost, good kitchen management or kitchen husbandry, call it what you want. It's really looking at how waste is not waste until it's completely been discarded and composted. Actually, there's certain elements that can be looked at with a seasonality lens and ask that question of how we can use that.
All right.
A bit of a long-winded answer for you, Hans, but it's a good way from a chef to look at it about how you can be inspired.
Well, absolutely, and they have a big responsibility when it comes to raising awareness about the stories around the plate. So thank you very much, Lloyd. It's time for us to move on, and let's go to our third panelist. And the topic is about waste. Please, Olaf van Veen, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you so much, Hans. I'll just be waiting for my slide, but in fact, I want to be starting with an anecdote in general, because you'll have to know about me. Me and my girlfriend were people that like to sleep in when we're in a hotel. That means that we're generally the last people in the breakfast buffet and also the last ones to leave. And on one particular day, I took the picture that you now see. Please have a click. And the breakfast buffet looked like what you're about to see. It was still very richly filled, and it made me realize, look at that. All of that pristine food you see right here that day went into the waste bin. And since this was any random day in any random hotel, basically, it made me realize that this kind and volume of food waste is most likely going to waste every single day in this hotel. In fact, in every single hotel in this city, in this country, and in the world. I saw a disaster on the one hand, but this is probably also one of the biggest opportunities that we have, I realized. And it's exactly what Orbisk is trying to grab. Please proceed. Because if we visualize the whole, everything that we produce in the world, can you please go on, Alexander? If we visualize the whole, everything that we produce in the world like this pie, and please click again, we know that 1/3 is wasted. Let's put that in perspective. If we waste 1/3, that means we're eating 2/3. And it means that 1/3 being lost means we waste about half a year of food every single year. And since we're so disconnected with our food system every once in a while, we forget, Alexandra, please click, that we waste the seeds, we waste you can continue, the water, we waste the land, we waste the energy, we waste the fertilizer or manure and our labor, all together accumulating into a very big sum of money. This we can change. But let's take it a little bit easier and go with somewhat smaller. If we see, can you please go on? If we see that an average kilo of food waste that we find in the waste bin in the restaurants that we work for, on average, it emits 4.5 kilos of CO2, uses 7,000 liters of water, and costs some 5.5 euros. Just the buying cost, not even including your labor. Still, restaurants waste about 10,000 kilos on average per year, worth 55,000 euros. That's where the opportunity is. But let's look at this problem, because it's there for a reason, because food waste can be considered a wicked problem. And the wicked problem is a term from the social domain. A wicked problem can be defined in a number of ways, which would be, the first one, there is no clear definition. What is food waste? Think about broccoli, like Lloyd just mentioned. The stem, some would consider that waste, others would consider that perfectly edible. There's no definition what food waste is. Next one would be, it's a symptom of other problems and processes. Consider the fact that it was very hard to find highly qualified staff of recent to man your kitchen. And lower qualified staff generally tends to lead to more food waste. Next one would be that there's stakeholders with conflicting interests influencing this problem. Your buffet manager will want to have it look as rich as we just saw until the end of the buffet, while your CSR manager wants to have it as empty as possible to reduce food waste. But also think about packaging. Packaging is a perfectly good way for food to remain good for a longer time, but then more packaging waste. So there's very conflicting interests weighing in here. Next one would be that there's no, the solution is not true or false. You didn't either address it or you didn't. It's more a question of good to bad, and there's a scale there to how the problem is solved. And since there is no clear definition, what is good and what is bad? And last, it's sad to say, the problem will never really be solved, in all honesty. We can become very good at it compared to what we do today, but absolutely solved, it might just never be. Luckily, a wicked problem doesn't mean that there's no solution. Can you continue? Yes, but we require systemic innovation approaches. And a systemic innovation approach means that you need to include the full chain. All of the actors in the chain need to contribute, from the producer to the waste handler, the wholesaler and the restaurant in between. Everyone needs to chip in on this one. And we require, indeed, next step, collaborative action. And luckily, that's exactly what we're celebrating today. More on that just a little bit later, because I want to tell you what we actually do at Orbisk. And the next slide, which you can see, is this thing that you see right here is about 5 centimeters big, cost 15 euros. Still, this little thing is over 1 million times more powerful than the computing technology that sent a man to the moon. The power and availability of this kind of computing power, combined with the power of AI, helps us to deal with our problems in an absolutely new way that wasn't possible just a number of years ago. And it's exactly what we do at Orbisk. Because we developed an AI-powered and fully automated waste registration monitor to be used at every chef's fingertips. The machine that you see right here and also in the back of me is a machine which can suit any kitchen. We outfit the waste bin regardless of which one you used, with the weighing scale you can see underneath and a camera unit on top. And within half a second, food waste is registered and recognized by means of image recognition technology. So now you have information on what type of food is going to waste, in what quantity, at what part of the day. And by tangible visualization, we help chefs to address that food waste and reduce. Please continue. Because let's look at what the chef, his day in a very simplified way looks like. Let's call him Lloyd for the sake of today. Lloyd starts his day buying and planning and has the goods delivered to his door. They will be prepared by his team and served to his guests. And unfortunately, any surplus needs to be disposed of. But Lloyd does so, as you've just seen, with a lot of passion for food. Chefs became a chef because they love food intrinsically. The thing that is missing, though, in all of the initiatives that you just saw is outlined here. And we provide with the technology so that Lloyd can now see, out of all of the initiatives and the beautiful initiatives that he just mentioned, how they work and how they can become more efficient in his next day, optimizing all of the other steps along the way. Please continue. Indeed, this will allow an average restaurant to save something like 4,000 kilos every year, which also means a 2 to sometimes 8% in margin increase. And mind you, this is an industry that generally runs about 5% margin. So this might be doubling your profit margin, improving sustainability and profitability. Next slide, please. We have the privilege to work already with some of the biggest food providers in the world, ensuring that our impact will be huge. But as I mentioned, we've got something to celebrate today, which would be, next click, our partnership with Unilever Food Solutions. The network and knowledge that Unilever has, combined with the technology and impact that we provide, will make sure that we can grow this thing beyond what we would ever be able to do as a startup ourselves. This can become big. And let's just see how big it can be in the next slide. Because we have the ambition to grow our solution, one more click please, to at least 15,000 locations in 2025, meaning that there will be a food waste reduction at these locations, one more, of 60 million kilos. You can click 2 more times, Alexander. Meaning that there's 270 million kilos of CO2 no longer being emitted and 420 billion liters of water not being used. And to put this into perspective, one more click, that would be feeding 30 million people for a day, or the equivalent of burning 100 million liters of diesel and 420 billion liters. That's half of the Dutch domestic water use in a year. Furthermore, a last point would be there's a saving of 330 million euros in this industry. One more click, that would be annually. So to summarize, we have a wicked problem at our hands. It's not going to be easy, but collaborative action, which we are celebrating today with Unilever and all its other partners, will mean that this impact will be bigger than we would ever be able to do. So yeah, with that, I'd like to give the floor back to Hans and also Harry after that. We are very happy.
Well, thank you very much, Olaf. Well, that's a startup. And talking about bold actions, bold promises also, by the way. What you're telling us here is that you're part of the solution and a huge part. What are the first reactions of people working with your system?
Yeah, like without question, everyone's very excited. In particular, the chef. I have to be honest. I was slightly afraid that a chef would be hesitant to use the system because it might have felt like a control mechanism. But exactly what I just stated, there's not a chef that doesn't love food. And there's not a chef that doesn't hate to throw away that food that he was producing. So far we've of course the system as a startup hasn't always worked perfectly. We're continuously optimizing the system and making this better suitable for the chefs in their daily operations. But absolutely, there's been no question whatsoever if this is the type of solution they were waiting for. Only when you start measuring, you can start to act, and that's carried well in the industry that we supply. Absolutely.
Well, it looks very promising. Thank you, Olaf. Let's go to our fourth member, the man with experience for more over than 30 years in the field of food service and food, and with a global perspective. Welcome, Harry, again. Well, you've listened, as I did, to all the 3 presentations. Do you have already some takeouts or things you think are, well, notable and interesting?
Yeah, many, I think, Hans, and thanks all the presenters, because for me what it shows, like we all know, is that food service is leading edge in the foods world. And that's why, as you said at the beginning, Hans, it's so nice that food service is also part of this World Economic Forum pre-event. And chefs are setting trends in food behavior. And I think, like Lloyd said, by showing the way that plant-based, for example, meals can also taste excellent and are so much better for the world. And I think what it shows to me is that we need all partners in the food service industry. We need the research, like Sophie mentioned, the insights, the behavioral changes. We do need the chefs, and I think Lloyd is just a representative of millions of chefs around the world. And I think the new element, if I may call it the new kid on the block, is high tech and artificial intelligence. And if we all work together, and me representing Unilever Food Solutions, if we work all together to really take this problem as it is, and we know that the food system is broken, I think it's known to everybody. But I think only by working together we will get there. And I'm really pleased that we have this forum here together.
Well, thank you, Harry. May I zoom in the plant-based discussion? I know there's a lot to do about plant-forward dining and the awareness the last decade, which is again amazing how many people are thinking about it and changing their diet, but also chefs who are looking into new possibilities and making plant solutions tasteful and attractive. But there are perhaps differences, and you're the one to the expert in it, on a global scale. When you look down to adoption of plant-based menus in different continents, what do you see?
That's a very good question. And like many trends, they start somewhere in the world. And some parts of the world are a little bit faster than other ones. But I think everybody around the world starts to realize that animal-based meat is very bad for the environment. And we see that, if I may call it, among youngsters. With all respect, Hans, to your age, I think I might be even older. These kids are much smarter than you and I are, and they are realizing it. They see the transparency of the world, and they see the need. But back to your question, I think Europe, of course, is leading together with the US. And I think in the old world, if I may call it that way, you would see many food trends coming from the US, moving to the UK, moving to continental Europe, and then moving to other parts of the world. I think what has recently changed is people start to discover the value of Asian cooking in terms of fresh, a lot of vegetables, etc. And you see from there the same trend coming. So where maybe initially it was a Western world phenomenon, I think it is changing very fast. If you look, for example, to China, maybe you've seen recent announcements from the Chinese government about environmental impact reduction, which by definition will bring them also to animal-based meat and to replace it by plant-based meat. And I think so all around the world you see it happening, even in Latin America, Brazil, Argentina. I think we all know they are really meat-loving countries. We also see the first signals there, and the first customers of us now starting even to buy there the vegetarian butcher products. So yeah, I think it's becoming a global phenomenon.
Well, I think so too, Harry. Well, I've got a question for Lloyd then, because Lloyd, we agree that chefs play an important role in, let's say, the protein flip to make the menus more plant-based. But what do you think? Are chefs ready for that transition? Are they well trained enough to educate consumers? What's your opinion?
Interesting, Hans. But I think it's a chef's passion to really understand trends. I think we talk about it as two separate things a lot of times, but actually sometimes it's really intuitive. For chefs, it's fundamental. It's the way they think. They're wired that way. Harry, just picking up on what you said, look into Asia as a kind of guiding star. For absolutely centuries, it's steeped in history about cooking with different vegetables. And if you look at the kind of breakdown of the diet in India in particular, they're a big veggie in country for many other reasons. But I think the key thing for us as chef is to really focus on taste, on quality, and where we can bring in that authentic element. And that's what makes kind of Asian cuisine really the sticking point. And that's where I would say to continue to look. But for chefs, it's taken in the trends. I think it's a natural thing, Hans, if I'm honest.
Okay, thank you. Well, Sophie, talking about behavioral science and moving towards plant-forward dining, you presented a playbook in your presentation. with a top 23, if I'm correct, intervention approaches. A lot of them, but it was a big slide. You know, a lot of sentences. What is the most effective one or easiest to do for professionals in food service?
Mm-hmm. So right at the top of that graph, top right-hand corner, was one that fell in our green code, which was a presentation strategy. So that's all about the language used on menu signs and labelling. So our sample ranked using descriptive language to describe plant-based dishes with more evocative terms as the top most feasible and impactful approach. And that was good for us because we spent most of 2018 actually researching that strategy. So I think we'd probably raised awareness of it quite nicely. That probably indicates. It's basically the issue at the moment is plant-based foods tend to be marketed quite often as the alternative to meat. So like the healthy alternative or the kind of calorie restricted or the option for vegetarians or vegans on the menu. So they're not necessarily put forward as the optimal kind of number one tastiest dish on the menu in and of themselves. So in their own right, they taste good. And so what we were looking at really in our research was if you change how you describe those dishes and you make them sound more kind of appealing, you really emphasize the flavor, the mouthfeel, you kind of emphasize the exoticism in them, can you boost sales? And we ran a couple of experiments, a big one with Sainsbury's supermarket chain in their cafe there. So across 38 of their cafes, we changed the language in about 10 of the cafes and tracked dish sales, and found that really simple change in the name could actually, in most cases, led to an uplift in sales. And I think our best result was something like 76% uplift after we changed the name. So significant and quite large. And we've also replicated that finding in a number of places. So we did a big study with Panera, we've been working with Google on a similar agenda. So it's a pretty consistent finding across the board, and it's one that's quite easy to do. So I think that's the reason why it fell in that right at the top of the list.
And that could be a quick win then.
Yeah, I think it also hinges on the kind of creativity of the people who do the naming. So we've published some guidelines on what names should contain, and the elements that we found work particularly well. But some of the names we generated just didn't, and some did work really well. So it's definitely something to do with the name and the fit of the dish, and the names matching consumer expectations about that dish. So you can't name it something and then the dish tastes terrible. The underlying meal has to also be good, but yeah, of the options, definitely a lot easier than kind of overhauling the entire menu or putting all your shelving out or something.
All right, I've got some questions from our viewers, the audience, if I may say so. This one is to all panelists, and perhaps Olaf will be the first to answer it. Why is food waste not yet embraced by the individual on the work floor as a huge opportunity? And two, what is needed to achieve this?
Yeah, so I guess the best answer to that question would be is that it's too much of it has been too much of the status quo, so to say. Indeed, the hotel buffet that I referred to on multiple occasions throughout the location, that's what hospitality is or was, hopefully, a full buffet until your last guest. So even though no one really appreciated it, if you do this day in, day out, then you'll get used to the fact that you're throwing away a full bin of whatever egg in the morning, every single morning, because that's just the result of the process that you're running. What we have done with a small number of our clients is indeed enthusiase them to present less on the buffet once it's closing down, but then use that opportunity to be in contact with your guest and say, you know, even though it's finished, and indeed you can put little communication modules there. If it's finished, we'll prepare something of something similar or that exact thing still for you right now, and it becomes a hospitality initiative. You're in contact, and that's what we all want in hospitality, right? So it needs a mind shift there. And also, funnily enough, of course, I don't want to be preaching my own story, but the moment that this machine is in their kitchen, also something radically changes in their way of working. And with radical changing, I mean it's creating this micro awareness. Every time that one of these staff members comes to this waste bin, there's this beeping thing on top of it, and it makes you realize, eggs once more. Okay, now, well, fair enough. Let's see if we can do something else differently tomorrow. The moment it's in there, people start making croutons, or the little soup cubes from stale bread, or start pulling some soups from the shavings of vegetables. It initiates a micro awareness that'll influence every one of those staff members just a little bit to do better. And at that point, we haven't shared a single point of data yet. That's just being a little bit more aware of what are we actually doing right here. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Someone else wants to fill in on the panel members?
I would love to, Hans. I think this is one of these things where people are not fully aware of the problem. They don't realize there's a problem in the magnitude we talk about. And if they do realize, nobody knows how to address it. And I think that is the biggest issue. And I would feel ashamed. I know that one day my kids will discover that 1/3 of all food in all restaurants around the world is being wasted. And in an increasingly transparent world, that will become more and more clear for everybody. And I think they will feel ashamed of it. So it will turn against our industry. So we need to do something about it. But the second thing is, and I think that was what I liked about Olaf's presentation, the amount of profit we together throw in the bin. We all throw this profit in the bin. And I think even, we don't like to talk too much about COVID in this session, but I think when HoReCa reopens after COVID, everybody needs to make some profit again, and very soon as well. And I think here you can not only help the world, but you can also help your own P&L, if I may call it that way, which is very much needed. If you can double your profit percentage of turnover by reducing your waste, there's no reason why not to do it. And I think it's what I think was called the wicked problem. I didn't know that word before, so I found it very interesting. But that you really say it's a very complex problem, but now with a number of partners around it, we can address it, and as a result, do better for the world.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Hanneke, one of the viewers, is saying to us, well, love the plan to scale to 15,000 locations. So you've got a big fan, Olaf. But she says also, given there are 15 million restaurants in the world, what would it take to go bigger yet? Yeah,
it's a very fair question. We've only been in business for just over a year now, so it's pretty impressive. 15,000 is a lot, but still, indeed, together with Unilever, I think we can grow much faster than we would originally have. So I was being humble, I suppose. But also, to be fair, the hospitality industry is an industry that is yet to be disrupted, so to say. It's becoming much more commonplace to have high tech like this in your kitchen, not only our machine, but also different ordering systems and stuff. But not everyone's is open, and there is people that are a little bit scared of it too, what that might mean for the job that they are doing. So it's both it needs to be embraced on the one hand, and on the other hand, we want to do this well. But it's a market yet to be disrupted, absolutely. So I'm hoping for bigger and for it to be absolutely commonplace in every single kitchen in the world.
Well, we have to educate the customer too, our guests. So perhaps that's an interesting question for Sophie from behavioral science, talking about buffets, as Olaf mentioned. Will the consumer, that's also a question from the audience, will the consumer accept less choices if they realize the enormous waste we generate by doing so? Sophie, what do you think?
I think there's ways of presenting food that can kind of overcome the appearance of less choice. So you can do things like spread things out, add displays, kind of organised buffets. You can change the order of buffets, so you have food with kind of, obviously you want to waste food, you want to not waste any food, but it's worse if you waste food with a much higher greenhouse gas emission footprint. So you want to kind of place those in different areas of the buffet, and you can do things like modify the size of serving utensils, so people are taking smaller spoonfuls, give them smaller plates, so they have to go up and down multiple times to the buffet. So there's a lot of things you can do in terms of the general architecture of the buffet. And then in addition, you can add in signs, and you can ask people to kind of not overfill their plate, or word it in whichever way you want to word that. And there's quite good evidence across the board that that can work. A lot of research at the moment is going into exactly the best way of using that wording. So we're running a study at the moment looking at if you influence people's perception of what other people are doing. So you tell them other people are really concerned not to waste food, other people are taking kind of multiple servings at different times rather than all at once. So that's one angle, but there's lots that you could use. So lots of options. They can all be tested to see if they work, and it's an area that does need more research, but I don't think there's necessarily going to be consumer pushback that we can't get around with some clever programming.
Okay, thank you, Lloyd. You've got, from chef perspective, and less choice to consumers to prevent waste. What do you think?
I think it's always been a challenge for chefs, and it's normally come at the angle of cost. You know, because if you think historically, we would have been looking at, we may not have been talking about the most CO2 efficient dish, we would have been looking at the most expensive dish. We would have been looking at portion scale and size and appropriateness and weight, you know, even down to, you know, the part of the behavioural piece, looking at where it's positioned on a kind of buffet stance as well. So where does that dish sit? So I think it's going back to, and I really liked Olaf's terminology of micro awareness. So I'm going to steal that one with some sort of pride, but it really goes back to educating and making sure you can have that influence on people so that they understand what the decisions they're making. But yeah, I think it's always been there with chefs. I think it's about you know, changing or just tweaking the approach slightly and raising the awareness. I think, you know, Sophie mentions it. You know, if we can start to use that influence, and that's not just with the consumers, it's around making the chefs think in that way as well. It's already there, it's deep rooted. I think we just need to draw it out in a slightly different part, and by doing that with some stats that support it, it's always an easier conversation.
Well, what is also interesting is you see in China now some restaurants which are single item restaurants, and they're growing very fast. So single item restaurant means it could be something like a hot pot restaurant or a clayfish restaurant. So they have almost no waste. Maybe they have literally zero waste by changing their concept completely. And I think also what we see now during COVID days, that also people are reducing their menu as well to be kind of profitable and manageable. So I think it's also to do with communication, more awareness. I think more awareness of the issue, people will accept and respect proposals like Sophie just shared, I think.
Yeah, absolutely true. I mean, I'm always, when I see a restaurant where they have 40 menu items from burgers to pizza to noodles to whatever, that generally gives me the shivers because that's a recipe for food waste. Absolutely true. So I didn't hear about these single item restaurants. I'm very interested, but indeed narrowing down and doing what you have, doing that very well is the easiest, well, not so much the easiest step if it's your formula, but that is a very definite step for reducing the amount of items in your kitchen, therefore the food waste you produce.
Yes, well, this is one of the big food trends of the, let's say, the last 5 to 10 years. When you look at concepting in international cities, from New York to San Francisco to Berlin, Amsterdam, everywhere, those single item restaurants are really, you know, on the rise. And be iconic with one excellent product, and you find your way in crowded market, and that's a fantastic solution when it comes to no waste. Also, Olaf, you've got a point over there. Another thing is, dear panel members, that there's sometimes the feeling when it comes to when you talk about the discussion of more plant-based diets, is the feeling that people sometimes have. Is it a matter of us all going vegan? You know, the option on the list which Sophie presented are perhaps likely to be very restrictive for restaurants. So, Sophie, what's your answer to that?
No, is the answer. So no, we don't. Not everybody has to go vegan. We need a widespread reduction in the amount of meat eaten. And as I mentioned in the presentation, I think there's various recommendations been put out for the amount of animal products across the board, depending on how healthy you want the diet to be. Our recommendation is that 1.5 burgers equivalent a week. So animal products are not excluded from the diet, but they're drastically cut back and replaced ideally with plant-based alternatives. So it's, yeah, I think the misperception around plant-based is that it means vegan, and it doesn't necessarily, and that's a bit of a shame, because I think there's quite a lot of people who are, well, actually nearly everyone I speak to is quite willing to reduce meat or choose different types of protein or switch from red to white meat, just any small step that's better for the environment. But I think the vegan is quite a polarizing topic. So yeah, just want to emphasize the point that it's reduced reduced meat, not no meat.
Well, I've got a question from the audience who is presenting also an alternative from Roberta, and she's telling us, I'd like to ask about the better part of less and better meat. And she's telling, sourcing better meat is crucial, supporting sustainable practices and animal welfare, but unlike addressing food waste, it costs more. How can food service play a role in mainstreaming a shift to better meat? Who is taking up that question?
I can answer a part of it on better, but maybe it's one for Lloyd potentially. It's just very complicated to judge better. So there's lots of different parameters you can think about, kind of animal welfare. Do you want to think about environment? Do you want to think about greenhouse gas emissions, biodiversity, water use? So certain types of meat will rank quite highly on something like animal welfare, but they might not actually be any better in terms of greenhouse gas emissions impacts, for example. So it can be difficult to judge that clearly. And I think that kind of in all cases, a move towards more plant-based sources has added benefits. So obviously eating more kind of nuts, seeds, fruits and vegetables is good, is, you know, flat out good for people's health. So I think that shift has a lot going for it. If you have chefs who are kind of very creative and can create some good tasting dishes that are a good competitor to a meat dish on the menu, then I think that it's hard to argue against a shift towards more plant-based, regardless of kind of better or worse meat, depending on the criteria.
Well, yeah, you know, the race to the bottom in the meat industry, cheap meats and animal welfare, I think that's the important takeout she's presenting to us. Lloyd, you've got an opinion about that? Better meat, less meat,
yeah.
But better meat?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, just to kind of piggyback off what Sophie's already mentioned, you know, I think there's a couple of things that need consideration. Yes, absolutely, animal welfare, and we'd be certainly interested in better meat, and also the amount of time meat's travelled. You know, that does have an effect on the you know, the carbon reduction, the carbon footprint, and also water consumption. But I think there's something, you know, us as chefs can do with you know, working closely with partners and also external organisations around how we could best incorporate and utilise different parts of the animal. You know, so you know, I guess it's looking at how do we utilise all of those cuts to make the most and drive the most value. And you know, we did some work in the UK, led by a UK food team a couple of years back with WWF, and that was about how you reduce the meat content, you know, without really, just a slight tweak on a recipe, kind of engineered down 10% of the meat without making a quality adjustment. And actually what we found with typical dishes, a bolognese, a ragu, actually there's more flavour. Nobody missed any more meat, because if you look back to, as I said earlier, authentic taste, what would they do in Italy? They'd have a fantastic base of onions, garlic, mixed herbs, carrot, celery, and so forth. And then they'd add the meat. It was about cost. And, really, if you've got that authentic flavour, the kind of true value of the meat kind of really shines through.
Yep. All right. Well,
Hans, if I may build on what Lloyd was just saying, for me, one of these pivotal moments was that as a food lover for the last 60 years or so, I think I always thought I was a meat lover. Yeah. A meat lover, and if you would have just had this panel maybe 7, 8, 9 years ago, I would have definitely defended I would be a meat lover. And then I met a few in this role, meeting many chefs and enjoying a lot of great food. I discovered I became a food lover. It is not by definition the meat, it's the food, it's the taste, and that's why I wanted to build on what Lloyd is saying. It's not by definition that you need to have whatever mince meat in there or other kinds of meat. And I think when I met a guy in Rotterdam, a chef, and he was proud because for the first time in his life, in his restaurant, he said, I can sell vegetable dishes for the same price as meat dishes. Normally they're cheaper. But I am proud because I have now managed it in such a way that people love my dishes that much that I can charge the same price. And I think we're all familiar also with the stories at home. At least my wife once in a while replaces meat by plant-based meat or no meat at all. And again, many cases there are where you don't even notice it, which is really surprising. I would not personally have thought that about, as I said, 7 or 10 years ago. So yes, I think it is all to do with naming the dishes and a delicious dish. It's not by definition meat.
All right, I want to touch COVID-19, but before I do that, I've got a practical question from one of our viewers, and that's for Olaf. Can the machine recognize ingredients cut into little pieces?
Yeah, that's a very, very valid question. I hope my network had some problems just now, but I think I'm okay again. Yes, it can. Basically the beauty about this artificial intelligence technology is that it is able to recognize basically anything you would and I would be able to with your naked eye, as long as you train it well on the relevant. You train an artificial intelligence like a little kid, right? You train a little kid to recognize what broccoli is and what the little broccoli pieces are. It's a question of learning, and it needs to see broccoli very often in order to be able to do so. But once you do so, you can have it recognize anything in any type and shape that you want to. So it recognizes tomato cubes, slices, or whole tomatoes, for instance, and the shavings also, because we tend to be able to recognize that. You would be able to too. That does also poses a challenge, admittedly, right? So we take a picture from the top, meaning that we can't identify if a red soup is tomato soup, because you wouldn't even be able to do so. But generally, because you only have one red soup on your menu per day, you don't run a paprika soup and a red soup, most likely, at least most places wouldn't be. And that means that you can deduce that this red soup, by means of the menu items, was in fact your tomato soup for the day.
Yeah.
So yeah, in fact, an AI has the potential to become more accurate even than the human eye.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, I want to touch, let's say, what's happening around in the world nowadays, COVID-19, which has a huge impact on food services industry, but also on consumers and their attitude towards food. So we're talking about no waste, we're talking about planet-friendly dinners. But there's a question for Lloyd. When you look at the impact of COVID-19, do you see also a different or a growing attitude among consumers that they're more aware of the let's say, let food be thy medicine. That food is very important to keep you safe and healthy. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely, Hans. We're still in a kind of stage of lockdown in the UK, and what that's meant really is it's essentially seen, you know, people with more time on their hands and cooking more at home. So, you know, they're watching YouTube videos, or they're looking at kind of the usual, you know, food routines that they have and what they're doing in the kitchen. I guess, and at the same time, with everything shut down, you know, us as humans have kind of seen firsthand the impact that we've had on the environment. We're able to watch the news more, so we're more informed. And also we've seen, you know, clear evidence. It was on the news a couple of months back in the UK around, you know, some of the incidences of better, you know, air quality and cleaner waters. And I think that, you know, the connection between the two has never been more evident. So yeah, absolutely. I think with more time on their hands, people see a kind of opportunity to make an impact themselves, and they're also able to have the time to look at their own behaviours and make those changes, big or small. And diet is often one of the most concrete things that consumers, you know, they understand they can control.
Yeah, thank you, Harry or Sophie.
Yeah, I think during COVID days, people start to realize more and more they need to take better care of themselves, the people, and of the planet. And I think that both has become very clear, and people spend more time on it, and people are more conscious about it. So I think it has been, if you like, a moment of reflection for all of us. And maybe we were forced to it due to the circumstances, but it has been a moment of reflection. And what happens during a moment of reflection, you suddenly realize your behavior. And you say, maybe it's not the best behavior. Maybe we can do better for the people and for the planet. And I think that's what's happening. And that will change some consumer behavior also after COVID.
Yeah, well, there's another side to that story. I've got again a question, and it's about what kind of shift you think is going to play out in the fast food industry, because that's also an important part of food service, of course, because it's a very large part of food consumption with lots of meat and poultry being served. People who normally know it's not the most responsible choice, but they enjoy it for that. Will fast foods also be impacted because of COVID-19? What's your idea, Sophie? May I hand that question over to you when it comes to consumers?
There's definitely been a kind of more visible debate around intensive farming and the link with that between disease after coronavirus. I think that's definitely highlighted some of the issues associated with that and made people a bit more aware of the fact that their meat comes from an animal, and that animal might have been reared in a way that is not conducive to the best health always. I think the fast food restaurants work on efficiencies. So if we can come up with an alternative to meat, which is being worked on at the moment, that can produce, you know, the product at scale in an efficient way, then I think there's potential that we will be able to shift consumers to kind of plant-based alternative options for things like burgers and chicken nuggets. And we've seen Burger King and McDonald's and a range of other fast food outlets introduce these in the last year. There's been kind of debate about whether or not that's been a way to try to sell more products, or whether it's actually a kind of wholesale effort to make their portfolio more sustainable. So that, I guess there's a debate around kind of why those products are being introduced. So I think it just really depends on, I think, the pragmatics of there being a viable alternative to these meats, because it's going to be very difficult to completely change diets, sadly, across the board. And people do enjoy fast food. It's just, can we make that fast food better? Is it possible?
All right, thank you. Well, there are a lot of questions from the audience, so here's another one. Olaf, what is the expected cost for installation and maintenance of the Orbisk machine? And how affordable it is for the smaller food chains and restaurants? Because for most of the developing countries, the food industry is still highly organized.
Yeah, true. Well, there's one simple answer to that right now. Currently, the product goes for a price of a market price of €7,000 per year, which generally for the type of restaurants that we work with is easily earned back over 2 or 3 times, sometimes up to 10 times your payback. But mind you, I still consider that price to be high, and I hope to become cheaper in the years to come, because this technology, like I mentioned, is continuously advancing, and we are hoping to create a sort of light solution for smaller restaurants in more challenging environments, so as to indeed make it commonplace for everyone to use. So yeah, that's going to be developing and will be becoming more affordable and available to smaller food chains and restaurants. Something funny about the developing countries, I'd like to mention there, of course, that sort of type of money is definitely too much for those developing countries. But in general, there's less food going to waste at the end of the chain in developing countries. There's a lot of food, say in Africa, that's going to waste throughout the chain because it's very humid and warm and whatever. So foods will perish along the way. But since for instance, some countries in Africa, the amount of money you spend on food in your daily life is something like 40 to sometimes 60%. So you'll know better as a consumer than to waste food. It's such a big influence on your daily spending. Here in Europe, we're living close to 10% of our daily spending is on food. So we can, I'm going to say it bluntly, we can afford to waste food. So thinking about this technology in restaurants in developing worlds, yes, I hope to do so one day, but admittedly, they do much better than we do when it comes to this end of chain food loss.
All right. Well, we've got 10 minutes left, dear panel members, and we promised at the very beginning to formulate some bold actions to share that with the real UN summit people over there. So, well, thinking about bold statements and BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goals, and Olaf was mentioning the chip he was showing, which was much smarter than the rocket science we used to get to the moon. But talking about a BHAG, that was a BHAG. That was a historic BHAG. You know, put a man on the moon before the end of the decade, and before the Russians do, by the way. That was another reason. And they did. They did. Well, you know, knowing everything there is to know now about the food system, and the role food service the important role food service plays in become a part of the solution. Do you have any thoughts about bold statements? That's an open question to everybody, to young energy, but also to wisdom, Harry. So we need wisdom in this one. So
maybe we hand over to Sophie then first. No, thank you for putting me on the spot, Hans. Well, I was thinking that I think there are two things. One is increasing awareness, but it's not the hairy objective you're looking for most probably. But I think that's what's needed. What would be a great objective in my view, if you would say, for example, by the year 2025, that 30% of turnover in the food service industry of all the meals we produce is plant-based. And I don't know, Sophie, maybe you know the figure what it is now, but I guess it's, I don't know, it might be 5 or 10% or something like that. But let's dramatically increase the percentage, not of the dishes on the menu, because I think that's not good enough. Because as Sophie explained earlier, we need to change descriptions, we need to, as Lloyd said, we need to make them more delicious, etc. But that, as an end objective, get a significant higher percentage of the total turnover in the food service industry on plant-based. And I think that will set the trend, and food service are trendsetters for retail, for consumers. So I think there will be something like that could be something significant. Sophie, do you know what the percentage is today in the food service?
I don't, and I think it really varies, but it's definitely smaller than 30. Yeah, I would definitely second your point, because I spoke a bit about presentation strategies earlier with language, but up in the top corner of our graph, the other major approaches, the good ones, are increasing the availability of plant-based options. We find that when you swamp people with choice of good quality plant-based options, it can actually shift what they purchase. So there was originally an idea that people are quite staunch on meat. So if you're a burger eater, you will always choose the burger. But there's quite a lot of research that's come out in the last couple of years to suggest that people's preferences are a bit more malleable than that, and we can change them. So changing the environment around people's choices to make it more conducive to them choosing sustainable options would be definitely worth doing, and be wonderful if more food service operators adopted that. And I think what we tend to find as well in lots of the research conducted on things like cutting portion sizes or changing the order of buffets or menu design, it doesn't necessarily lead to the consumers being less happy. Quite often the consumers don't even notice the changes. So there's been quite a few studies where they've done things like cut 20% off the meat portion and just replaced it with a larger side of starch, and you find consumers don't even notice. Their rankings on kind of how good they thought the meal is exactly the same as the original. So I think if there's a fear that adopting some of these strategies will alienate consumers, it's not necessarily the case, and many of the strategies have multiple ways that you can implement them that will fit with the way an operation's running, like you can modify. So I think there's a lot of potential. Okay.
Lloyd, you've got some input for that goal Harry is talking about?
Yeah, it's a very aggressive goal, but certainly if you want to move the needle, it has to be something that's going to be a challenge. And I think we would certainly see that across a number of the brands we operate, we are looking to increase the number of plant-based dishes to certainly more than the 33% incidence on the menu. And to pick up from what Sophie's mentioned, those dishes have to be of a good quality. They have to have the language appropriate to do that sell. Because that's the way we'll get the buy-in. There's nothing in it for a food service company to create a beautiful dish, not tell the story that sits behind it, the consumer doesn't buy, and it's wasted. I think it's linking this all together that's the key part, and ultimately the consumer will be the decider. But there's a very challenging objective that I think is achievable.
Yeah, and 2025. I heard Harry saying 2025, so within 5 years.
Absolutely.
Okay, so within 5 years, 30% of all the meals. And Harry, we're talking about worldwide or certain continents, or how do you see that?
Yeah, let's say everybody has a different starting point. So yeah. we might, maybe together with Sophie or Lloyd, you might like to do a little bit deeper research, but you could also say if that's too complex, the 30% globally, it's too far away from every operator or every company, that you say you increase it by 3% a year, for example. That would be the alternative. Say whatever your status was, let's take 2019 as the base, because 2020, as you all know, has been very much disrupted by everything. So take 2019 as a base. What was the amount of plant-based in your total food buying? And let's increase that percentage by 3%.
Yeah. Of
plant-based versus animal-based. And I think 3% doesn't sound a lot, but if you would do that for 5 years in a row, it's quite a bit.
Absolutely.
And it will also, I think, to be honest, if I see that playbook where Sophie was talking about, and maybe I shouldn't say this loud, Sophie, but I think many people would have never seen it. And I think if you get one of these big, ambitious ambitions or targets out there, people are forced to start reading this stuff because they need to do something together.
All right. I've got some minutes left for the no waste, perhaps big Harry or this year's goal. One of the viewers said 15 million restaurants. That's also a bold action.
All right, start.
Olaf, what's your inspiration? What's your goal?
Yeah, like I mentioned, indeed, of course, it starts with measuring and stuff. So encourage people to do better, because you make it very apparent what they're losing currently. and that will have a big impact at some point. And I'm not sure if I'm going to make friends with what I'm about to say, but we need to start discouraging waste. Not only food waste, we're also talking about the amount of electronic waste, building waste, all this type of waste streams that we generate as a society. We need to start discouraging that, and I'm not sure in what way. It might be with fines or whatever, because you can sort of in general say we're going to up the price of food in general, which in some cases might be necessary as well. But then your customer is going to be immediately influenced. But if you discourage waste, just the amount of waste that is picked up at your back door, then you'll be inclined to reduce it even further. But let's start with indeed that I always like to start from the positive point. So we're encouraging them to do better and thus become more profitable. And at some point in a not so distant future, like CO2 tax or whatever, we should flip that coin and start, saying this is just no longer acceptable. We're just not going to do this anymore because this won't manage. So let's start on the optimizing.
Yeah.
Would it help, Olaf, Hans, if you would say it becomes mandatory to measure waste in food service, and then in kilograms and in value? So kilograms might be a little bit, I couldn't care, to be honest, but when you add value to it in euros or dollars, you say, okay, wow, this is significant, and every business person will then start to realize that there's a double incentive for the world and for their P&L.
This is starting to happen in general. There is countries in Europe that will make waste registration mandatory, in fact, in a not so distant future. So yeah.
Make it mandatory for everyone in 25 then. Every restaurant, that's also a goal.
Yeah. Nice.
Right.
Perhaps it needs a little bit more refinement and thinking. Dear members of the panel, but I think it's a great start to to be part of the solution. We have to be bold. We have to take actions, and I want to thank you very much for this great conversation on this Monday morning. It's 9:59, and we have to close at 10. I want to thank all the viewers, the audience, for participating and posing their questions through the panel. And I really loved the discussion. And it was great seeing you. And I hope this will lead to something. Well, thank you very much for your insights and your wisdom and your knowledge. And let's get to work, ladies and gentlemen. We've got some things to do. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a great week.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.